Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping.
All right, so we'll get started. Let me thank everybody for coming out tonight. And before we begin, amongst the students, who all has a Cash App? All right, so that's good. I'm going to pass out a quiz. And the first person who submits the quiz and the answers are correct, as the flyer indicates, you will receive $100 on the spot.
Give me two.
Now, you graduated already, Dr. Mark. You already graduated. So we're going to just start passing them around. Brother Borders is going to start it off. The more you learn, the more you earn. So knowledge is power, but it's also money. All right. Let me first thank each of you all again for coming out. I know you all could be in your room studying and getting ready for class tomorrow. But I think before we begin, I have to acknowledge both of my bosses. You all are probably saying, well, Ro, how many bosses do you have? My work boss, the president, Dr. Taylor, thank you for coming out. And let me, acknowledge the boss of bosses, my wife, Dana Rice. Thank you for coming out. And let me acknowledge the boss of this house right here, Miss Piggy. Thank you for allowing us to have this talk in the library. So we'll go ahead and get started. I think it is probably appropriate for us to start off with a video, and then we'll jump into the contents of the book. All right?
Solve an argument between any two groups of citizens, black and white or otherwise, unless the leaders of the two groups are eager to see a solution to the problem. I personally do not think that Hosea Williams is seeking a solution. He's not trying to establish communications between the blacks and the whites. I think he is trying to get publicity for himself and to create dissension. And this makes it very difficult for those in the black community who have a legitimate grievance, or for the white leaders who are seeking to avoid disturbances in their own community and to meet legitimate grievances, to get together to work the problem out.
When those come in from the outside and agitate, it's wrong. It's wrong in the black community, it's wrong in the white community, particularly for a community like Columbus, Georgia, where the people are getting along. To have somebody come out and create and precipitate trouble.
Are you putting the finger on Mr. Williams as the cause of the weekend trouble in Columbus?
Very specific on Hosea Williams, chief racist of them all.
Principles of democracy.
We bring you today to Forsyth County, Georgia, just 30 miles north of Atlanta, which in the past few weeks has gained the reputation of being a hotbed of racism and the current battlefield of the civil rights movement.
He is Hosea Williams,
So I'm going to ask my trusted assistant, Marley Rice, to come forward. She's going to be my PowerPoint presenter button pusher. Grab your seat. And if you see Marley's shirt, Black history all the time, black is beautiful. All right. All right, sit down. All right. Someone told me today that it's Leontine Price's birthday. Is that correct? Can anybody verify that? It is. So what an appropriate moment for us to gather in this house today, named after the famous singer. Marley, press the button. You just press that button and I say. All right. So before I really talk about Hosea Williams, and for those who came in a little bit later, did everyone get a quiz? All the students, do you have a quiz? All right. If you don't have a quiz, I suggest that you quickly get one, because that little white piece of paper that is worth about 12 cents can get you $100 if you answer the questions correctly. Dr. Taylor, she's going to pay for it, so. All right. So I thought it would be appropriate for us to start off with this quote from the Atlanta Journal and Constitution. This anonymous writer said that Hosea Williams was in the tradition of American populism, which has always included figures who combine brains, rascality, voter appeal, and the guts and availability to speak an uncomfortable truth. Now, we have somebody in the room who knew Hosea Williams and who worked alongside Hosea Williams. Will you all please say hello to Dr. A.J. Stovall? Give him a round of applause. But there's someone else in the room who also knew of and spent time with Hosea Williams. And I'm assuming Brother Mark, would you raise your hand, please? So if I say something wrong, I'm sure they won't mind correcting me. So I have to make sure I'm on my A game today. Next slide, Marlon. All right. If you have a quiz, I suggest you start paying very close attention. All right? This is Hosea Williams' stat sheet. Does anybody play baseball or basketball? All right. At the end of each game, you're going to want to know how many points you scored, how many assists you had, how many yards you threw for, right? At the end of your life, your stat sheet matters. People are going to wonder, what is it that you did? So Hosea Williams was arrested at least 130 times.
May I have a quiz, please?
Ma'am?
A quiz.
Does anyone have a quiz they have not yet written on? Can someone make some copies? I ran off 60, but I'm assuming we're out. Oh, they're in the back.
Oh, there.
All right. Can you bring some to your sister in the front? All right. The organization that Hosea Williams started, he fed at least 1 million people for free. Hosea Williams was responsible for, in many ways, the passing of several pieces of federal legislation. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. No other activist can say that they have a track record as noble as that one. When Hosea was in his 60s, he was still leading marches. 1987, he leads a march in Forsyth County where at least 20,000 people showed up. So you all saw Oprah Winfrey a moment ago. She was covering that march in 1987. The last number, 72. Hosea Williams was 72 years old at the time of his last march. Think about it. At age 72, this man was still leading protests for equality, being a voice for the voiceless. Next slide, Mark. All right. So I'm a man of faith. I don't mind sharing that. I believe that this project was providential. In other words, it was ordered by a power much higher than me. Next slide, Marley. So everybody can't see the pictures on the screen, so I'll just try to vividly describe as best as I can. This is a picture of my mother. And I had long hair then. This was about 3 years ago, but I've since had a haircut. My mother. I grew up in Atlanta. And my mother, a single mother, she would often take me to historical museums or meeting spaces. So she took me to the African American Museum for the Panoramic Experience, the Apex Museum. Next to that is the Samuel Jones Boys and Girls Club in Metro Atlanta. And when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I would go to the boys club every summer. And my mother would say, while going to the boys club, that's where crazy Hosea Williams lives. And I didn't know who Hosea Williams was at age 7. But what my mother was doing was planting a seed at age 7 years old. When I was working at Alabama State, they brought the Selma to Montgomery Museum on campus. It's a National Historic Landmark, and I really got interested in the man after that. This next picture is of my wife and I. Now she looks a little different there. We may have been finishing coming from the swimming pool. But I was always going somewhere with a book in my hand. I want you all to understand that those who read lead. Those who read lead. So we were in Hilton Head. I wanted to go out and swim and have a good time, but I realized I had a job I had to do. So I was reading my book in a restaurant. This last picture is with Ambassador Andrew Young and my wife. I had to tell Andy, hey man, you're holding my wife's hand a little bit too long. But Andrew Young was a lieutenant to Dr. King, the second African American mayor of Atlanta, a congressman, and also an ambassador to the United Nations. So he's also the person who wrote the foreword for my book. So when I was writing speeches for Bernice King, who is Dr. King's daughter, we were at a gathering. So I shared with him my project. He said, well, Rice, you should turn this into a book. And which is what I was able to do. So what I'm saying is that sometimes we are being placed in situations that are already planting the seed for our future endeavors. Hence the materialization of the book. Next slide, Marlon. All right. I wanted to make sure that I had all of the correct information about this man, so I took research trips to Attapogus, Georgia, which is in the deep southwest corner of the state of Georgia, and also Savannah, Georgia, which is where Hosea really cut his teeth as an activist. I went to the Williams family plot. I interviewed people who knew Hosea when he was a younger man. So next slide, Marley. All right. This book started out as my dissertation when I was at Auburn. So I retooled the dissertation and turned it into a book. And you see another picture of one of my daughters, Madison. She's my oldest daughter.
And my sister.
And her sister. So Madison was about 4 years old at the time. So I knew, and I'm sharing this part because one day you all are going to go to graduate school. You're going to write a dissertation, or you're going to medical school. The primary sources will tell your story for you. So I knew the moment that I saw the collection, I knew I had something on my hands. So I looked at Hosea's personal writings. I looked at video and photographic footage. So it really helped me to understand who I was writing about. All right, next slide, Marlon. All right, so book chapters, next slide. Before I get into that, there's a reason why I wanted to share this slide with you. Can anybody guess why I would put a bubble gum machine on a slide that's talking about Hosea Williams? Anybody? Well, not you professors in the back. You the mom. You the Dr. Taylor. Anybody want to take a guess? Why would I put a piece of bubble gum in such a serious conversation?
Did he like to chew bubble gum?
All right, that's a good guess.
You never knew what you were going to get?
You never knew what you were going to get. Okay, good guess. Anyone else? Yes, Marlon. Okay, Marlon says he liked gum. All right. In Alabama, everybody, in Alabama, if you wanted to vote, and if you were a black person, you would have to guess how many pieces of bubble gum were in a bubble gum machine. It gets worse. If you had a bar of soap, they would make you guess how many bubbles were in a wet bar of soap to vote. Black folks had to take what you call a literacy test. These were tests that sometimes PhDs couldn't pass. They would ask you to quote a section of the Constitution to vote. In 1867, 104,517 blacks were registered to vote in Alabama. By 1903, less than 3,000 black folks were allowed to vote in Alabama. And if you all are inquisitive like I know you are, you're going to ask why. What happened? Literacy tests, and black people had to get white people to vouch for them to vote. They would say, oh, Seymour, he's a good boy, he can vote. And what they would do in Alabama, they would not allow you to vote until you were 70 years old. Because in their minds, he's not going to be around to keep voting in multiple elections. This is what people were fighting for in the 1960s. So when you don't vote, when you choose not to register to vote, you are telling these folks who cares about the sacrifices that they made, spilling blood and burying their kids beneath the soil for rights that we sometimes don't appreciate. Next slide, Marlon. All right. Everybody isn't here. I don't think everyone in here has a love for history the way I do. But this quote is so profound, and I'll summarize just a little bit of it. Dr. Rolundus said that historical memory is the product of intentional creation. Anytime we hear about John Lewis or see a picture of John Lewis, he's the one who is credited for really leading or starting Bloody Sunday in the Selma to Montgomery March, which is not true. And I argue that in my book. On Sunday morning, March 7th, 1965, Hosea Williams is on the phone with Martin Luther King Jr. Martin King is in Atlanta. And it was Father's Day. Anybody have, not Father's Day, but Family and Friends Day at church. You all know about Family and Friends Day, right? Yes. So Dr. King, whose father was also a preacher and was the pastor of the church. And so King says, well, Hosea, we really shouldn't have this march because I got to stand in for Dad today. And he tells Hosea Williams to call the march off. Now think about it. Dr. King is the boss. Hosea Williams tells King, no, we can't call off the march. They're already ready to go. We have to keep this thing going. Now, if I defy my boss, you all will see a U-Haul truck outside of 171 because I'm on my way back home to Atlanta because I've lost my job. Hosea Williams did not care about losing his job. He cared about voting rights for black folks. So this was a part of his arsenal of agitation, as I call it in my book. So his insubordination led to John Lewis's immortality. You never see pictures of Hosea Williams on the bridge. It was always John Lewis. But there's a quote I want you all to remember. If I were to cut off all of these lights right now, it'll be dark for a second, and you can't see anything. But within a few seconds, your eyes would adjust. So the eyes adjust to darkness. Sometimes when we know something is not right, sometimes we just go along with it because it seems like it's the natural order. Hosea Williams did not do that. Next slide, Marlon. So the book is organized into 10 chapters. Not 7, not 8, 10. I want you all to know that Hosea Williams was born to a blind mother and a blind father. Think about this man's odds at birth. You're born to your mother is blind and your daddy is blind. But Hosea Williams found his way out. He joined the army, served in World War II, came back to Atlanta. He studied at Morris Brown College. And Hosea Williams earned a degree, not in political science, not in history, but he earned a degree in chemistry, Miss Kirk. So he earns a degree, and Hosea thought he made it. So he gets a job working with the federal government as a chemist, making good money. This is in the 1950s. He had a white secretary, which, according to his standards, that was a sign of professional and material wealth. He had a nice lawn, nice house. But then he realized that every other black person who applied for a job was never considered. So he realized that he had been duped. So he realized that he was a head house, I don't know if I can say the word in here, N-word. So he starts rebelling. So he joins the NAACP in Savannah. And so his efforts led to the desegregation of all public spaces in Savannah, Georgia, prior to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So he was willing to, as you all say, risk it all. Does anybody know what a kamikaze is? And I'm not talking about the drink, and I know you all shouldn't be drinking anyway. Yeah. See, Keisha, I knew you were brilliant. He's a math major, but he's also loves history too. He was Martin Luther King Jr.'s kamikaze. In other words, he would put his body and life on the line for SCLC and for the causes of liberty, freedom, and equality. And chapter 4 talks about that. Chapter 5 discusses Hosea's roles in Bloody Sunday, the Selma Montgomery March. Does anybody ever watch the Kentucky Derby? Or heard about the Kentucky Derby? Somebody tell me what it is.
Horse racing.
All right, horse racing. All right. Hosea Williams and Ralph Abernathy, they even staged a protest at the Kentucky Derby. They ran out on the track to prevent the horses from going around. These folks did not mind fighting for a cause. So there are 3 other chapters. The movement continues, politics, prosecution, and persecution, and I'm an opportunist. And I won't go into all the details, but if you get the book, then you'll understand the titles. And know that if you don't want to read the book, and I want you to read it, the book is also on Audible. So you can listen to it while you're driving, listen to it when your roommate has on the loud music that you really want to study to. Next slide, Barley Rice. All right, so he was a trusted advisor to Dr. King. And he would often push King to take measures where he may not have wanted to take. So between Hosea Williams and Andrew Young was the more mild-mannered, conciliatory advisor to King. Hosea Williams was on the extreme in most cases. So King would try to fall somewhere in the middle when listening to those two. He was even with King when he was killed in 1968. This is a picture, you can't see the whole picture, but King, Hosea, Fred Shuttlesworth, and Bernard Lee. All of them HBCU graduates. So don't think that you all are in this place and in this space by happenstance. One day, somebody's going to look at you and say, look at Keyshawn in the picture with such and such. That is what HBCUs can produce. Next slide, Marlon. All right, everyone has seen this picture. All right, Marlon. So, this is the day before King was killed. You see Hosea? Any Sigmas in here? All right. You see Jesse Jackson? Any Omegas in here? All right. Any Alphas in here? All right. Any Kappas in here? On this bridge, again, on this balcony rather, 4 men, HBCUs, Greek-letter organizations, household names. Next slide, Marlon. All right, here's a picture of Hosea Williams bringing King's casket onto the plane in Memphis, Tennessee. All right, next slide. All right. Has anybody seen The Godfather before? All right. This is like a Godfather moment. So, Martin Luther King Jr. was just buried. And if where do we go from here was a picture, I think that's it. So you see Jesse Jackson, you see Ralph Abernathy, Andrew Young, and Hosea Williams. They just buried their leader. They don't know which direction to go. Hosea was 42 years old at the time. And if Hosea Williams on this day never lifted another hand to fight for equality, he would have been a first ballot founding father of a newer, better America. And I'll explain that to you in a moment. Next slide, Marlon. Next slide. All right. Hosea Williams was an organic intellectual. You all saying, well, Bryce, what in the world is an organic intellectual? He was not an intellectual in a traditional sense. He didn't publish books and articles. He didn't teach in a professorate. He was someone who was consumed by a social movement. And it was indivisible from who he was as a person. Hosea Williams was crazy, they said. He was fiery, bombastic, belligerent, as some folks said about him. And if you knew him, I see some folks waving their head, yeah. But they learn about the world that they changed from appreciating it. And they listen to the group that needs their help the most. An organic intellectual. Next slide, Marlon. So this is Dorothy Cotton. Dorothy Cotton was the highest ranking woman in SCLC. And the SCLC was dominated by black male preachers. So it was very sexist. And King, to some extent, did not really believe in women leaders. Now, I'm going to tell you all a secret. It has to stay in this room. There will be times in which Coretta Scott King would try to offer advice to him. And he would tell her to go back to the room and do what women are supposed to do. And I can't see myself telling Dana Rice to go in the back of the room and she just takes it. She may walk on out the door and find her another row. I don't know. But this is what Dorothy Cotton quotes about Hosea. She said that his style could sometimes repel rather than draw to. He turned every staff meeting into a fight. Martin needed Hosea at one level, in a way. Martin said to me, who is going to get out there on the streets and organize the way Hosea does? In other words, King knew he had a stable of effective leaders. And they all had egos. But they were brilliant in what they did. Next slide, Marley. All right, Hosea was so interesting. It's no secret that he was arrested a lot of times for drunk driving in Atlanta. And I wonder what his legacy looked like if he did not have the driving record. So he had so many moving violations that he got locked up while he was an elected official. So Hosea Williams, listen to this. He wins election to the Georgia General Assembly while he was in jail. So you can't campaign while you're in jail. There was no Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, no Snapchat. So in other words, the work that he did for people spoke for itself. The work that you do, everybody, has to speak for you. Next slide, Marley. So this is just a press release that he wrote for himself. He was a master promoter. Next slide, Marley. So these are some of the terms that people use to describe Hosea Williams. And I said some of it earlier. A bull in a china shop, which means that he was destroying things. Larger than life, predictable, unpredictable, erratic, fearless, reckless. A tireless self-promoter. An opportunistic, useless mischief maker. A sinister organizing genius. But one word that no one would say to describe him is coward. That'll preach in any church. Next slide, Marlon. Hosea Williams wasn't broke either. All right, he had an empire of businesses. Again, he was a chemist by training. So you see the empire that he had on the side, and he was a preacher, an ordained preacher, but he ran a bingo operation. And the businesses generated more than $4 million over a 13-year period. And the IRS, I don't know anybody in here likes the IRS, I don't know. But no indication that any money went to Williams, and we'll leave that there. Next slide, Marley. I wanted to show this picture to you all because I think it speaks to us in a variety of ways. So Hosea's license was suspended. And he purchased a 10-speed bike so he can get back and forth to the office. So he makes a speech from the steps of the Capitol. And he says, I will not be silenced. If I have to ride a bike or even skate for the rights of black and poor people, I will continue fighting for my people until we are free or until I'm dead. So I may not have a driver's license, but I still have my dignity and self-respect. Sometimes you're going to lose something. Something that is valuable to you. Some days you're going to earn a grade in your class that you feel like you just didn't deserve. You may not graduate on time. You may have to wait another semester. I don't say the word ain't, but that ain't the end. You cannot allow a momentary discomfort throw you off of your trajectory. And I'm not a preacher, anybody, but I know what I'm talking about. So this man, again, he was a tireless self-promoter. For him to say that you're not going to take my pride and my dignity by taking my license. Now, keep in mind, he was mischievous, no doubt about it. But at the same time, how many people believe that because of his activism, he was targeted by the police? There were several times he got pulled over for a DUI and the charges were dropped. So there is an inherent system of inequality that goes back with law enforcement. He knew that, but continued fighting anyway. Next slide, Marlon. This is just another picture of him riding his bike to work because they took his license from him. Next slide. We're almost done, everybody. I can't wait to see these responses on this quiz. I'm ready to give away some money. So Hosea Williams did not mind arguing with some of the most powerful people in the nation. So he even startles one senator, George McGovern. Mark, you remember McGovern as a senator?
Oh, yeah.
He's telling folks in the United States Senate that our women are selling their bodies, our men are lying in wait to knock somebody across the head because they don't have the basic necessities to survive. He was a tireless advocate for the poor. Next slide, Marlon. So again, Hosea Williams had 26 moving violations over a 10-year period, at least 130 arrests. But this is what he said. This is evidence that they are not only trying to silence me, but to destroy the remaining black leadership. And if he had been convicted, he could have lost his seat. Next slide. All right, here's a picture of Hosea and Coretta Scott King. And he was always fighting against the establishment or the downtown power structure. He called them the folks who would sell out for money. So he would, if you get the book, you'll see him going back and forth with Coretta Scott King, Maynard Jackson, who was the first black mayor of a deep southern city, Andrew Young. In that video that you all saw, the first person, the white man who's talking, that was Jimmy Carter. If you noticed in that video, there was the old Confederate flag behind Jimmy Carter. Well, he was the governor of Georgia at the time, before he became president of the United States. Hosea Williams had battles with him too. So he didn't discriminate based on the person in the seat. But he was also committed to cultivating interests that led to his main objectives. A brilliant political antenna. Next slide, Mark. We're almost done. This is what somebody said about Williams. They said he's persecuted, hounded by the press. They said, what about the Thanksgiving turkeys that he gives out every year for the holiday? So there was always people considering him while also condemning him. So again, a very complex figure. Next slide, Marlon. All right, this is the last segment. The case for Hosea Williams as a first ballot founding father. Can anybody name a founding father right now? George Washington. Who else?
Benjamin Franklin.
All right, Stovall, you've been teaching these folks something. I heard Thomas Jefferson. I heard George Washington. I heard Benjamin Franklin. Who else? John. Man, somebody's over there cheating. I'm playing. So some of those names you just mentioned, tell me something about them besides their noteworthy achievement. What about George Washington? What else did he do?
First president.
First president. What else? Tell me something that people don't like to talk about.
He had enslaved Africans.
He owned slaves.
He had enslaved people. They weren't slaves.
Okay, I like that. They were enslaved people. You're right, my sister. Are you an NAACP? Yeah, I figured so.
Well, I'm a Delta, that's why.
Hey, I know something about you Deltas, and I like every bit of it. That's good. I can dig it. Oh, we like the K's too. You know, we can dig with them too. All right. So, I heard somebody say Thomas Jefferson, right? Also owned slaves. Who else? So, if we can give them the title of a founding father, and they had enslaved people, what about those who fought to liberate folks from second-class citizenship? So this is the case for Hosea Williams. Next slide, Marlon. All right. I was working for Bernice King at the time when this magazine came out. I was still writing my dissertation. And it was on the 50th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech. John Meacham, who was a Pulitzer Prize winner, said that King was the architect of the 21st century. What is ironic about that, somebody? How couldn't he say that King was the architect of the 21st century? Let's do some critical thinking here.
He never lived in the 21st century.
He never lived. What's your name?
Cassandra Dell, mass communications major, and I'm an AKA.
Okay, AKA. Okay, AKA. You devils, y'all gotta wipe the step, man. Uh-oh. Nobody jump on me now, okay? But King did not even live to make it to the 21st century, but was an architect. Now let's think about this. King died in 68. Williams died in 2000. So by the time King died, Williams fought for 32 more years. King died at 39. And when he died, and you all know the story, you all are from the area, King had the heart of a 52-year-old, I believe the report said. He was stressed. All right? Next slide, Marlon. This is what Lyndon Johnson said about Bloody Sunday. He said, at times, history and fate meet at a single time in a single place to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. So with Hosea Williams dead, it forced a white Southern president to stand before both houses of Congress to compare what happened in Selma to the founding of the nation. You all know about Lexington and Concord, the first battle of the Revolutionary War. You all know about Appomattox. What was Appomattox, somebody? Somebody tell me.
Was that the Civil War?
Man, come on, AKs.
That was the Battle of Appomattox was a Civil War's end, basically. Like they had a siege, basically.
And what's your name again?
Mass communications.
Man, mass communications.
My professor right here.
Next slide. This is what John Lewis said. Hosea Williams must be looked upon as one of the founding fathers of the new America. Through his actions, he helped liberate all of us. Last slide, Marlon. Bill Clinton, an American foot soldier and driving force behind the Voting Rights Act. Hosea Williams was a profile in courage. Hosea dedicated his entire life to making sure we never take a detour on the road to freedom. Next slide. So, here it is. This is it. Let us ask, how would Hosea Williams have been portrayed if he had a chauffeur? I argue that because of his driving record, DUIs, that sort of tainted his legacy. It shouldn't have, but that's the narrative. So as we think about this man and the sacrifices that he made, let us ask ourselves, what is our responsibility in making America fairer and better for everybody? Not just black folks, not just white folks, not just poor people, but for everybody. You all have that responsibility to do that. So, before my wife comes up to give us a freedom song medley, I want to know, does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir, Dr. Stovall.
Yeah, I want to clarify the businesses.
Okay.
The purpose of the businesses.
Speak a little louder for me, Doc.
The purpose of the businesses, because we didn't get any money from anybody. So we had to pay businesses in order to pay folks to picket, in order to pay the workers in general, in order to pay people that we had on the picket line, couldn't work. So we had to pay for them to eat. We had a soup kitchen and all those things. So when you talk about the $4 million, didn't go in anybody's pocket per se.
Right.
That's what we had to do to be able to keep the movement the same. If you go back and check with Dr. King, you find Dr. King only had one suit.
That's right.
And that suit came from Harry Belafonte. Now I'm saying that because most people don't understand the sacrifice that those that were in the movement had to make. I was supposed to get $100 a week. You only got $200 a month. Basically fed my family from the soup line where those turkeys that I used to cook on Thursday came from. But anyway, what y'all know that those persons that made the sacrifices, and our thing was we would die for the people. That's why we went to jail so many times. But I just wanted to make sure, because sometimes people get caught up with the money thing.
I know.
Thinking somebody's pimping the movement.
Yeah.
But that was the purpose of the business. So the only way we could sustain and do what we did.
Thank you, Dr. Stovall. Appreciate that. Any other questions about, yes, ma'am?
So I know Dr. Stovall just mentioned, and you did too, about the sacrifices of those that came before us and voting. You stand up, mass comm majors.
Yes, ma'am. There you go.
I know that you and Dr. Stovall mentioned about the sacrifices as far as those that were made before us, you know, to get us to vote. But I do have a question because you mentioned about like how Hosea Williams himself was, you know, often, you know, targeted by the police because, you know, he was a renowned figure in the civil rights movement and just, you know, in the black community. But as far as like systemic racism and things like that, that play a role in our government that we can't necessarily actively see, you know, how would you encourage somebody who believes in that to vote? Because a lot of them like to bring that up, like, well, nothing's being done, you know, I'm just voting for what? So how would you encourage somebody that believes like, oh, systemic racism is stopping everything anyway, so what's the point of voting?
You know what, that's a very good question. Frederick Douglass and also Coretta Scott King said a quote something like this, that freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. Frederick Douglass said it this way. He said that freedom is never voluntarily given up by the oppressor. It must be fought for and won by the oppressed. So in that vein, it is going to be dark. It's always been dark for black people in this country. But you don't sit and take it as if that's a natural or innate response. I have 4 children, and anytime they're upset when they were much younger, when you put them in the crib and they wanted to get out, what did they do? They cried. Understand that, and King said it best, that violence is the language of the unheard. Fighting, language of the unheard. So, when we look at what's going on right now with voting rights legislation that has stalled in Congress, the same people who were clapping their hands and praising John Lewis are the main ones voting no. So there's a reason why you had to guess how many pieces of bubble gum were in the bubble gum machine. They didn't want you to vote. And they went to extreme measures to ensure that didn't happen. Let's look at Georgia right now.
I am from Atlanta.
What if Georgians had listened to years of disappointment, right? Georgia elected 2 Democratic senators at the same time, one being black and the first black from Georgia to be elected to the Senate. because people band together.
They did.
Right now, Georgia could very well have a black female governor because people are banding together. And if it happened in Georgia, it can happen in Mississippi, it can happen in Alabama, it can happen in Florida, and every other state in the old Confederacy. So it's easy to be demoralized by it. But that's not in our DNA to be demoralized and just sit still. I've seen pictures of black women in protest lines with guns in their face and they're smoking a cigarette. They are unbothered. That's what it's going to take. That's what it's going to take. In 1908, you know the story in Minor Hall.
You know that.
I know it. So again, we can't just sit still. But I appreciate the question.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Any more questions?
Just real quick, Dr. Rice, without taking, stretching the time, I bought a book, and I can tell you that that book, even it's about Hosea Williams, but it will give you so much insight into the SCLC, operation, as well as Dr. King and the civil rights. That's what I got from it. And of course, we don't have much time, but I was going to take you up on that last chapter, describing Hosea Williams as an opportunist.
Yeah.
So in terms of the characterization, I'm thinking maybe it's yours or what you got from, the research, in terms of describing him as a con man, okay, as well as black Robin Hood,
Yeah.
As well as media manipulator. So, but I think you got so much response to that probably another day.
Well, I can respond very quickly,
Okay,
Dr.
quick,
Royo.
yeah.
So in the last chapter, it's called I'm an Opportunist. And those are Hosea Williams' words. Hosea Williams would have dinner with a diehard Democrat at 5 o'clock and have sunrise breakfast with a diehard Republican. He was opportunistic in that he's always looked for an opportunity to serve black folks and poor people. So he understood the art of compromise when you had to compromise. And life is about compromise, everybody. So people always said he was a con man or a charlatan. But people will always drive a narrative about our heroes. So we can't always listen to what the media says about the heroes who we exalt in our communities. Do your own research. All right? Any more questions before Mrs. Rice comes up with the song? I know it's getting late. Mrs. Rice, would you please come up and do your medley? Y'all give my wife a round of applause.
How's everyone this evening? I won't stand before you long, but I will be obedient and just do a little bit of a medley this evening. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home God is on our side. God is on our side today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. Thank you.
So now you see I'm not even the star of my own household.
You could be like they're preaching somewhere.
Hey man, hey. But that last verse that Dana sang, it is so true, and I think from everlasting to everlasting, God is on our side.
Amen.
So whatever we have to deal with as a people, we must never lose sight that God is on our side. You all know the verse that God is more for us than the whole world against us. So in that vein, let us leave here today understanding that there is a race for all of us to run, a cross for all of us to bear, if we're going to see a better America. Thank you. Now I want to see those quizzes. Let me get it.
I'll be there. Oh, and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, no more weeping, no more weeping over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go